Welcome back to Walk with TFB. Tim Bryson here, and as you know, I'm a Black millennial who's eager to have unfiltered conversation with authentic people centered on international education, global sport, and Black culture. Today's Tim Talk episode, we're back with another Tim Talks episode. Again, we dropped one last week entitled "The State of International Aid and Global Sport." I'm really just laying, our journey over the last 15 years, but also where we're headed. But this Tim Talks episode in particular is going to talk about the NFL. The NFL, and I'm so excited for this episode because I've been wanting to talk about it for a while now. And not just the NFL, but the NFL's internationalization strategy. One that I've been studying, been observing, and I've lived myself in a few ways, which I'll talk about on this show. And excited to share, some of the things that I've learned over the years. The NFL, right? What they've done as it relates to internationalization is something that I think has become one of the most ambitious global pivots in modern sports. I think what the NFL is doing is going to not just reshape fan culture, but also athlete pathways, business strategy, but quite honestly, the future of America's sport on the global stage. Yes, I know the NBA has done a lot of work, WW as well as even MLS, but how the NFL has gone about this, quite honestly, is a holistic approach, very comprehensive approach that signals their long-term commitment and investment in the international space. I just got back from Madrid. So if you follow me on social, follow Walk with TFB on social. If you don't, this episode is really a great time to do so. But I just got back from Madrid, where I saw all this up close. I attended the inaugural NFL Madrid game. This game was dope in a lot of different ways. And again, will there be an entire segment focused on my experience there? But what makes this experience a little bit different is that it was the second NFL international game I've been to, because last year I was in London for the last game at Wembley between the Jags and the Patriots. So for this Tim Talks episode is going to be like part analysis, part storytelling, part reflection. All in all, I'm going to break down, as a result, I'm going to break down the NFL's internationalization strategy, including the big pillars, long-term vision, what the league is really trying to do, because again, it's bigger than just these events. And I'm going to take y'all with me to Spain, right, and reflect a little bit and tell y'all about what I saw, what I felt, but also how the NFL is doing this in a way that serves the local community. So excited to get into it. And so without further ado, let's talk about why this matters now, right? The NFL for the longest time has been the biggest sport league in America, but it's also been the most domestically contained. We know the big events, in particular Thanksgiving Day, which is coming up this current week, in which we see as a spectacle, right? The U.S. fans, U.S. markets, U.S. broadcasting embrace the American football product. We even call it American football. And again, we're not going to get to the football soccer conversation, but it's not the U.S. Americans' fault. The British call it soccer, not us. But while the NBA and Premier League and other leagues were going global, the NFL chose to stay home because they could. I mean, again, NFL is beloved by many, if not everyone, across the United States of America. However, over the last probably 2 decades, we've seen massive growth because I think the NFL realized, their leadership realized that the money, the market, right, in the United States will be tapped at some point, and the next era of growth will be global, right? The future is global. The future of sport is global. The NFL is becoming global. And so things began to change, right? Media change, audiences change, participation patterns change, because what the NFL began to realize, especially as we see different generations enter not just the workforce, but have the ability to influence consuming power, is that each generation does not consume sport the same way as the generation before, right? Speaking for myself, I used to wake up every day and watch Sports Center. That's not the case no more. Athletes and students, people are consuming sport content via social media, right? Like TikTok and Instagram. But more specifically, fans, right, don't follow teams, they follow athletes. Fans don't follow culture all the time, they follow geography, which is why you'll find a Kansas City Chief fan in Miami, Florida. It's like there's a team in your backyard. Why are you cheering for Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce? It's because of something tied to the Kansas City Chiefs. And they follow identity before tradition. So thinking about the Raiders in particular, although they, have moved cities here a couple times in the last several years, the identity of what it means to be a Raider is important and why fans choose to follow that team. And because the NFL knows this, they have decided to double down and invest in internationalization, not as a side experiment, but something they want to have and to see as core of who they are and who they will continue to become. Because for them, internationalization is a strategy. business strategy, cultural strategy, talent strategy, relevant strategy, all to keep the NFL at a place that for fans, both in the United States and globally, can consume the sport, the media, um, through both buying tickets, merchandise, as well as travel. So if you care about global sport, you care about American football, football in general, right? What we're watching with the NFL is a case study in real time. And so I would love to talk about how the NFL is approaching this moment because it's bigger than just the international series that they started years ago now. It's bigger than just that, right? There are other things tied to their investment, their long-term investment globally, that I want to make sure I point out very clearly on this episode. So the NFL's international series started back in '07, 2007. And from '07 to 2015, they continued to host games through 2019 and then again in 2022. Of course, the pandemic influenced that greatly. London kicked them off for the longest time, and games were hosted at Wembley Stadium. But then we saw Mexico jump into the fold, Germany, as well as some other countries. Wanted to jump in and say, like, yo, we'd love to host. But when the NFL did begin to host these games back in '07, right, it was cute. It was a novelty, right? It was like, whoa, like they're really trying this, really doing this, really flying, athletes across the world, across the pond, if you will, to play a game in another country. And the answer was yes. And they did it in '07. They did it again in '08 and again expanded into Mexico, then Germany, of course, more recently, Spain, excuse me, as well as Ireland, Brazil, etc. However, what they're doing now is no longer just a one-off situation. They're building infrastructure within these countries that signal their permanent presence as through local partnerships, but also on the ground systems and like literally local offices that say, like, we're not just here to visit. We're not just here to play a 60-minute game, hopefully no overtime like it was in Madrid. We're here to stay for the long term, right? And in these through these local partnerships, but also the physical presence in these countries. The NFL's Global Markets Program, get the name right. Yep, they changed the name recently, but Global Markets Program also signals its long-term commitment. This past year, I believe it was May, they dropped the most recent Global Markets Program list. But they finally announced that with the additions of the Buffalo Bills, my hometown Bengals, and the Tennessee Titans, all 32 NFL clubs will now officially participate in the Global Markets Program across 21 international markets. And per the NFL's website, it says the International Markets Program will continue to prioritize global growth, connecting with fans across markets around the world. Now, this market program started in 2022. There, of course, were early movers to this show. I'm thinking more specifically about the Kansas City Chiefs, which I don't know why they keep coming to mind right now, but they do. And there's a story as to why that is. Um, but again, as a result of the Global Markets Program, you have now staff in these countries, you have grassroots camps, fan clubs, youth programs, community engagement, because it's not about sport tourism. It's about internationalization strategies, which again, internationalization athletics is what we do, it's what we talk about, it's what we study. And so the Global Markets Program and how they are shifting from events abroad to ecosystem building is foundational work, was foundational work. And because it mattered because it told those host countries that, like, yeah, we're not just here to visit. We want to be here. We love being here. And it began to embed both American football and the NFL's league within the local community. The second thing they did, pillar number two here, is that they recognize that if you want to make it, if you want to go global, make it personal. I say that all the time. If you want to go global, make it personal. Now, it sounds kind of backwards, but stay with me for a second. Talent is important. Talent is important. And it became a competitive priority because as the NFL began to see the growth as it relates to hosting events abroad, they also recognize the athlete pathways, right? Getting more athletes into the collegiate system, the NCAA system, as well as the NFL would help to keep fans from those local communities in these countries as viewers and as consumers as those individuals were going through both the collegiate process into the NFL, right? So, prime example, if you had an athlete from Guayaquil, Ecuador, studied abroad in Guayaquil, well, yeah, service abroad in Guayaquil, and that athlete participated in the NFL Academy, then got picked up by, I don't freaking know, the Seattle Seahawks. There's an entire community in Ecuador who have now become fans of the Seattle Seahawks simply because that one person made it to the league, right? You see what I'm saying? The NFL took a page of the NBA's book, to be honest, because they tried to do this like, we'll just train these, we'll identify talent, try to, get them to the draft and see who drafts them. They say, you know what? We saw what the NBA is doing as it relates to these academy structure. Let's build our own academy. They started with one academy at Loughborough University over in England. Then most recently expanded to a second academy down in Australia. The one in England is now called NFL Academy Europe Africa, while the other down in New Zealand is called NFL Academy Asia Pacific. And they are intentionally going out to recruit talent, youth, to come to these academies, teach them the foundational football skills and knowledge, with the goal of being recruited into the NCAA ecosystem, and then obviously, heading to the NFL. That's pathway number one. Another pathway was roster spot. So I believe it was last year or 2 years ago, the NFL owner said, "Yo, look, we recognize the game is going global. We will open up an additional roster spot on every single practice squad that is designated to at least one international athlete." And I wrote a blog about this. I'll hyperlink it to this episode. But number two, second way they identified talent being a means to help grow the game. The third way they've done this is through the International Player Pathway Program, the IPP program. And this program was what they initially, started with, to be honest, to recognize there was probably some more efficient and strategic ways to do this. But again, it takes those who are not going to go through the NCAA pathway in particular. So older athletes, maybe athletes who played a different sport like rugby in particular, thinking about some of the ones who most recently come over to the NFL and play for different teams and say, yo, we'll teach you how to play, right? Get you drafted and or going through the international roster spot designation role, and with the goal of, again, making the active roster and representing your country on the global stage. So again, it's identifying that if you want to go global, you make it personal. The same way that other sports like basketball is done, of course, with the NFL, NBA, sports like soccer, global football, right? Sports like track and field has done for years and generations, especially to the NCAA ecosystem. And that recognizing that, historically, international talent in American football has always been the kicker, right? The punter or the place kicker. But now you might see the next great, defensive lineman, tight end, quarterback, maybe, from Lagos, from Sydney, from Berlin, from Sao Paulo, from Buenos Aires, right? Is very well, it's not far fetched. We might see that. We will see that at some point. We will for sure. And the NFL also knows that because, again, if you want to go global, you make it personal. Pillar number three, the NFL's fan growth strategy blends both exporting the sport and its culture, as well as localization, right? Export and localization. Now, again, that's a fine line to, tiptoe on, if you will, because you can't just take an American product and place it in a different country and hope that it's the same. It don't work like that. And this is where everything shifts as it relates to what at least I've seen. Again, as someone who's been to both a game in England and now in Spain, as it relates to how how the NFL is doing this in internationalization in a way that is becoming or that is successful, because again, they continue to expand. But then two is like allowing fans in those local contexts to like embrace this new thing, right? Because yes, they watch it, stay up late and watch it in the respective time zones, but actually going to a game and whatnot is new. It's a new experience. So of course, yeah, they're hosting games abroad. I think there were 7 games this past year. There'll be nine. I think seven is this year, 2025. There'll be 9 next year. Of course, with the first game happening in it's New Zealand, if I'm mistaken, Melbourne, Australia, excuse me. They're selling out stadiums, right, in minutes in these respective markets. They're partnering with local creators, thinking about Georgia on Sports over in England, as well as networks like DAZN. They're part of local celebrities, broadcast partners, brands, right? Because localization, especially within these home contexts, builds belonging, right, and builds connection between that local community as well as the NFL. Quick story about Madrid, right? There were several different Madrid influencers who were hosting tailgates for the game. They're like, "Yo, like, we know you're coming over to Madrid. We know people in Madrid, the Spaniards, right, who may or may not know what to do on game for NFL game day. I'm gonna host creators. I'm gonna host a tailgate, and if y'all want to come, it's X amount of euros. Pull up. We'll have food, have drinks, of course, and like create this tailgate experience the Spanish way, which I thought was pretty dope. But also shows how localization is a key part of internationalization strategy, especially the NFL's. And so, from what I saw in Madrid, it's definitely happening. I think how they tailgate is very different than how folks tailgate in the United States. Definitely more bar culture, but even how the stadium was set up, Bernabeu, next to the different bars and around the different blocks around the stadium was pretty dope. And then, honestly, something I think the U.S. should adopt, to be quite honest. But nonetheless, export and localization both had to happen at the same time. So we hit three of the pillars so far, right? So shifting from both events abroad to ecosystem building, shifting from trying to get athletes straight into the draft, but making it personal by the creation of the academies, that player pathway program, as well as international roster spots. And then pillar number three, the NFL's fan growth strategy, blending both export and localization. There are a couple more pillars I want to highlight as it relates to the internationalization plan of the NFL, at least that I've again studied and have been involved in myself, is that historically Europe has been the anchor. Again, I mentioned that international series started in '07. And London was the model. Like London was the sport, the city that said, you know what, like we'll try this out, the test group, if you will. I think it's important to note London back in '07 was approaching, and probably soon after was awarded the bid for the 2012 London Olympics, which is important to note. But again, easy to do, right? Same language as the U.S. market, so pretty easy to do. They already had a stadium, and there's already demand in recognizing flights, direct flights, especially from the East Coast of the United States over to London was what 5 hours, 6 hours max, which makes sense because one of those first teams in that first game was the New York Giants, who played the Miami Dolphins and actually won 13-10. And while London was the model, it wasn't until they played in London from '07 until he was 16, and then Mexico jumped in and said, "Yo, we want part of this, right? We're your border, we're your neighbor. We want part of this." And Mexico played games between 16 and 19. COVID, of course, happened globally. There's no one more game played in 2022, and there has not been a game played in Mexico since, which is important to note. During the same time period, another European country, Germany, said, "Yo, yo, yo, we see what's going on. We got the infrastructure over here. Let's get involved." And in 2022, the first game took place in Germany was in Munich, between the Seattle Seahawks and Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which is again they've been now have played one, two, four games since COVID. Again, helping to expand the international series slate. I'm looking at these notes over here. And then most recently, we see a couple different countries have stepped into the fold. So first and foremost, Brazil. So Brazil just hosted their second game in 2025, but they started the first game in 2024. 2025, there are two new cities or countries that jumped in. Ireland, number one, as well as Spain. Again, that game that I went to in the last game. And then what we'll see in 2026 is a game over in Melbourne between the Rams and somebody else. As well as there's conversation about Paris and the New Orleans Saints being a host team in Paris in 2025. Excuse me, which means there'll be two new markets that would enter the NFL International Series, Australia, really Oceania, and Paris. So again, it's continued to blossom and quite honestly explode since 2022. And as a result, we now see it again. They've established an anchor in Europe, but the next play in the future is definitely Latin America, definitely Oceania. Again, the creation of the NFL Academy, Asia Pacific, no brainer, but then Africa. And I've said this, I think an NFL game in Africa would be astronomical, in the sense of like the both the spectacle, like what that actually mean for the NFL, but quite honestly for the people of both the continent, or my continent, and the whatever country in which that game is played. Someone who's been to the Basketball Africa League Championships is definitely an interest and an appetite for sport in American sport, American sport leagues to compete on the continent. And I'm just waiting. I'm just waiting. I think Nigeria is definitely one to look out. I think South Africa is one. I think thinking about the continent right now, Ghana could be interesting again. It's gonna be interesting to see which country has the infrastructure to make that happen, especially from a fan standpoint. But Africa's coming, and they're coming because again, you don't invest in the NFL Academy Asia Pacific and not have a Melbourne game. You don't call the academy over in at Loughborough, NFL Europe, Africa, and not have additional investment in the continent. And we've seen individual players, run camps and whatnot, youth camps back on the continent. But I'm waiting for the NFL to host a game in Africa. Definitely will be there because again, they're not just thinking about NFL was never just thinking about the next 4 years. They're thinking about the next 50, next 100, and where this sport is headed. Pillar number five. This is a good one. This is a really good one because, as people know, right, the NFL is not a sport league. The NFL is an entertainment league, right? It's a business. It's an entertainment business, not a sport league. And so, what the NFL is doing as relates to their plan is positioning itself as a global entertainment brand. It's a brand. It's the Shield. We all know this because the NFL has never just been a sport, never ever. It's a media product. It's about storytelling. It's about lifestyle. It's about culture and how they are positioning and repositioning American football to be a global entertainment property is very similar to what the NBA has done, Formula One, Premier League, again, other global brands. And they're doing that through streaming deals, celebrity engagement, global merchandising, i.e., the Global Markets Program, and then cross-industry partnerships. And the shift is intentional, right? They recognize again, it's not just a sport. We're looking at this as a multi-billion-dollar business that will have tentacles, if you will, across many different markets around the world. And American football will be the avenue, one of the avenues and the mediums in which that would take place. Because in its essence, global fandom is not just built through competition, it's built through culture. Global fandom is built through culture and not just competition. And so, how do you infuse American football and the NFL's brand through the culture and not just, and for fans not to just see the NFL as another game or competition within their respective markets? So, we talked about five pillars, but one that I want to give as a bonus, it's almost like free game, if you will, is that flag football in the LA 28 Olympics and Paralympics is the Trojan horse for what the NFL is trying to do globally. Flag football in the LA 28 Olympics and Paralympics is the Trojan horse for what the NFL is trying to do globally. 1000% for sure. And it's not coincidence. Yes, the timing might look like coincidence, but it's not coincidence. It's a reason why Goodell and the owners say, yo, like, we want to have 17 international games at some point. It's a reason why there's been speculation, and I've called this, and I'll say this again on this podcast, that I truly believe that there will be an NFL team that is based out of London. I think it's gonna be the Jacksonville Jaguars. I call it the London Jaguars, and I'll drop that link in the podcast description too. But there's gonna be a team abroad. However, the LA 28 Olympics and flag football is something to look out for. This is important because what the NFL has done in partnering and really amplifying and making sure that there is a pathway for NFL players to play in the Olympics as, flag football athletes might be the most strategic move the NFL will have made in decades. And quite honestly, probably since its inception, to be quite honest, like keep it a buck with y'all. Because flag football is accessible, right? As compared to other sports and definitely American football and how NFL players can help introduce flag football and really just football, American football in general, as a sport to the world without asking the world to adopt American football infrastructure, thinking about both the equipment but also the stadiums and whatnot, is smart as hell to be honest. And you're doing it at the Olympics that are hosted in the United States, and we know different countries and different host Olympic committees get to choose which sports to host when they come to their country. But this is like this is a no-brainer. You're telling me a flag football at LA 28 and the NFL is involved in allowing players to play in the game. Come on now. And we know whichever players are going to play in the game, teams are going to hype them up and on social, blah, blah. There's already fandom because these teams are playing abroad, every, 3 or 4 years depending on their home football schedule. Like this is the long-term pathway to getting every schoolyard, every youth league, every community around the world interested in American football. We'll start you at flag, and again, it's accessible both from a financial standpoint, but also thinking about gender, both on and off the binary. That if you want to play American football, you start with flag football. And my guy Trayvon Briggs is doing a lot of work around this with his nonprofit Win with Integrity. And that flag football is again the Trojan horse for expanding the NFL's brand, right? Global entertainment brand around the world. So it's that quiet motive that we're seeing and hearing rumors about again. Well, definitely now it was exciting when it announced a year or so ago, but that's the one to look out for as we think to both LA 28 coming up here in what about less than 3 years. All right, so now I'm going to shift for a minute. I'm going to shift for a minute and take us to some of my reflections from Madrid because my time in Madrid was pretty dope. I mean, yeah, I love speaking Spanish, so definitely appreciated that part. But there were a number of different moments in Madrid. I'm like, yo, like the NFL is really doing this. I think when it happened, when I went to the game in London, I'm like, oh, makes sense. Again, it's very much easier transition, obviously, from a language standpoint. But also, I've been in London before. I mean, I've been in Madrid before too. But it was much more just like, I can see it, like London, United States. Obviously, complicated history, to say the least, and keep it, very high level right now without diving into a lot of the politics, but also um, nuance that's taking place between these two countries, our two countries. But nonetheless, I'm like, yo, Madrid is going to be quite interesting because I was there last year and I went to Bernabeu and I'm like, I know they play, soccer here, global football here. So to see an NFL game here, like, I'm curious. I can see it because the stadium was being renovated. So I'm like, it's definitely going to be active. But I'm like, I'm very, very curious to see actually who pulls, well, one, who's selected for the game, and then two, who pulls up for the game. So as y'all saw, the teams who played in Madrid were both the Dolphins and the Commanders. And the reason why the Dolphins were selected was because they hold one of the global markets rights to Madrid or to Spain, excuse me. And when I got to Madrid, the first thing that signaled like, oh, like this is a big deal, was going through customs and the immigration officer asking me, "Are you here for the game?" Obviously, probably clocked my American accent. I'm like, "Yep, I'm here for the game." He stamped my passport, no questions asked, and said, "Have a good time." I'm like, "Wow, like sport really does, you know, do some things around the world," which I thought was pretty cool. The second thing that happened, well, I said, you know what, I'm gonna take some observations at the game. I was only there for about a couple nights, so I said I'm gonna write down observations at the game. With the one observation that I guess was really an audible observation is that there were so many different people who either were local to Europe and or to Spain who said it's crazy you came all the way from America for the game. It's crazy you came all the way from America for the game. I'm like, wow, like I guess people in Europe weren't expecting Americans to pull up, but Americans were deep. Americans were deep. And I'm gonna get into my observations on actual game day. But there was two things that two moments, if you will, that resonated with me as it relates to like, yo, like the NFL is really doing this shit. Like it's undoubtable like that they're not going to continue to invest in both Spain, but also um, competitions and building this ecosystem abroad outside of the Spanish market. The first, the day before, I went to this hotel. It's called some CR7. For those who follow soccer, that's Cristiano Ronaldo. He has a hotel in Madrid, and went to I think like the 11th or 10th floor, and it was a Kansas City Chiefs bar at this hotel, bro. I'm talking like Arrowhead Stadium uh pictures, pictures of Mahomes and Travis Kelce. And I'm like, wait a minute, the Dolphins and the Commanders are playing. The Chiefs, if I'm not mistaken, are in the same division as the Dolphins, but this is a Kansas City Chiefs bar. And I can't remember if I asked someone like how this became a Chiefs bar or whatnot. I know the Chiefs have marketing rights in Spain as well, so that's probably a reason why. But I'm also curious, like, why don't the Dolphins or Bears have a bar in Madrid? But that's whatever, another podcast, another day. But I'm like, damn, like it's an entire cheese bar. But if you were to look around, I took some pictures. I'll be sure to drop them on our Walk with TAB Instagram page. There were jerseys from every team, damn near every team in this Chiefs bar. A lot of Americans were present. Met some Germans, well, now my German friends who were present as well. Got to talk with some folks from Spain who's only spoke Spanish. And like, yo, like literally on Translate. How did you become a Chiefs fan? I like Patrick Mahomes. They were the first team that won the Super Bowl when I started watching football. My boyfriend, my girlfriend follows the Chiefs, yada yada. And I'm like, I'm mind blown. I'm mind blown to the point where they ran out of Mahou, Mahou, the local beer over in Spain, which I don't want to hear nor smell nor taste for a very long time. But nonetheless, I'm like, wow, like this is actually insane. Like, is the NFL bar, the Chiefs bar in this hotel, overlooking whatever important building that was next door. And all these Americans and just internationals from around the world are coming to this bar to essentially, pregame the night before for this game. And I'm like, this is actually crazy. The second moment that stuck with me was actually on game day and went to a bar that's like quite literally like right next to the stadium, right next to Bernabeu. And I'm sitting there drinking probably a Mahou or I can't, Mahou or probably, can't even think of it right now. And I'm wearing my Joe Burrow jersey. Shout out to Joe Shiesty. And this little kid, I kid you not, he's probably, I don't even know, 8 years old. He walks up to me and he starts flashing his shirt in front of me. And it's a purple and black shirt that says Baltimore Ravens, that y'all probably could have assumed or guessed. And I'm like, this man's talking shit to me using nonverbals. And I love it. I freaking love it. And I'm going back and forth. I'm like, nah, like I love Lamar. I love Lamar, but I can't do it. I'm a Burrow fan. I can't do it. And I got a video again. I dropped this on our social as well. I can't do it. I can't do it. And he just kept just flashing his purple and black. And I'm like, yo, like, we're not even speaking words right now, let alone the same language. And we are communicating simply because of our affiliation to our teams in the AFC North, a division, as y'all know, that is not like each other. What made this moment even more special later was that probably, I don't know, 30 minutes later when I left that bar and was walking down the street trying to find that tailgate, actually, I mentioned earlier. Him and his parents were there again. They were encouraging him earlier, right? Laughing and whatnot. Again, they spoke Spanish, again, Spanish locals. And I'm like, yo, like, we're talking shit again, you nonverbals. But now I'm using talking to him in Spanish, like, how'd you become a fan, yada yada. And his parents were encouraging him to speak English so that him and I can have a conversation. And in my head, I'm like, yo, like, I mean, I'm assuming, 1000% assuming that his, excuse me, that his parents did not speak English or did not want to speak English, which is more than fine, especially in a country where Spain's the first language. But then two, they knew their son could speak English and they recognized that English could be, that's this moment in tied to sport could be a moment where their son could practice English with a native English speaker to become better at English. Same way I was trying to become better at Spanish. I'm like, this is a beautiful thing. This kid, I kid you, he's probably 7 years old, 8 years old. I got a picture of him too. A beautiful thing. And literally all this came to be was because his Ravens affiliation and my Cincinnati Bengals affiliation. Now, those are two moments that stuck with me, though there were other observations at the game that I definitely took note of, which I'm about to read a few of them out now. The first of which is that there was no replays. There were no replays at that game until the first one happened with 3:18 left in the third quarter. There were zero replays. So official made a call. As y'all know, as someone who watches, has been to an NFL game in person and or watches it on TV, like, oh, was it the right call that? No replays. Like you had to be locked in. You had to be knowing what the hell was going on in the game, which I think is a miss. But they eventually figured it out. Probably a technology situation. The operations and logistics at the game were not the best. And that's probably saying it nicely. I was in a extremely long line. Not even a line, like a mob of people. 15 minutes before the game started. I don't know how I got in right when the game started, but ops and logistics, event ops, like we got to figure that out for next year. And again, I think part of it, well, let me stay here for a second. Number three, they ran out of food, which is very similar to my experience at the women's basketball game in Paris a couple years ago, celebrating or cheering for South Carolina and Notre Dame. Well, cheering for South Carolina against Notre Dame, but they ran out of food and beer. But they ran out of food. So again, I don't know what the expectation is of what you think Americans might drink or not drink, but like can't run out of food nor beer, which happened again as well. Not a lot of bathrooms. I think at the stadium. I think again part of this could be culturally, and again just having a conversation with some folks who I know who live abroad. Those games are sporting events. Again, my conversations have generally been for male figure or male folks to attend without the women being there as well. That's I think the bathroom situation in regards to how many women's bathrooms and men's bathrooms were actually available for folks to use definitely took away from being able to experience the game in real time. What else? And then the entrances. So you better hope you get your own ticket because they split gender on a binary, male and women, male and female, to where males had their own entrance and females had their own entrance, women had their own entrance. And if you didn't have that ticket, you were kind of screwed. And so I think all in all, there's excitement of like, oh, like American football, et cetera. But I think recognizing that there's a perception of what I think people have of like how Americans celebrate or go to games and whatnot. But the reality is like, yo, like we Americans drink, Americans eat. Especially for those who are using this event as a means of tourism, because again, it's not the NFL's mission, but definitely a byproduct. But like people can go overboard. You're not just going there to have one beer or have one whatever empanada and like call it a day. Like we're here to have a time. And so I think that I'm curious to hear like what those conversations are like for those who are playing in the games. Again, I'll do my best to reach out to someone and just have a conversation about it. But all in all, like A plus. Like yeah, these first time to happen in Madrid, inaugural game, of course. And so went well. All was well. Thinking about what's next. So again, talked about some of the pillars of the internationalization strategy, the NFL strategy. Excuse me, my own Madrid reflection, which I'll continue to talk more about in future episodes. And we'll drop some of those moments, especially the Kansas City Chiefs bar and my Ravens fan little guy on our Instagram. But thinking about what's next, there's a couple big questions that I'm thinking about. Number one, athlete pathways. So again, if we know the NFL is investing in these academies to get more international athletes into the NCAA system and structure, how do we support these international athletes once they get here, especially in a sport like American football, which is a revenue generating and sharing sport? What does that mean, right? What does international athlete development mean? What does football player development mean for international athletes? That's one big question I'm thinking about. What will college athletics do as the NFL expands globally? So again, I've said it, and I will stay on my high soapbox and say that the future of the NCAA is global. And so, as the NFL continues to invest in a strong way, like what will college athletics do in response? How should universities, academies, and high school systems respond? So, separate from collegiate sport, there's going to be a trickle down effect, right? There's going to be different international athletes who may not make the academy, program, right? Because a tryout and an application process. And if they do want to come to the States to play American football with the hopes of playing in the collegiate space, we've seen states, I believe it's Texas, who ban international athletes at the high school level, which I'm not, that's a choice. But how will high schools respond? Like, how will academies respond? Will there be more internationals, going to the IMGs, if you will, to play and practice the sport? I'm also curious to see more about the NCAA football game. And I said this before, I think the video game is going to be a means to get more international athletes to the league. And so curious to see how that plays a factor in international athlete recruitment, especially in the sport of American football in future years. But last but not least, like what does it mean for international students as it relates to mobility? So we see NCAA football games being played abroad, which I think is going to have a strong impact. But how will the NFL and even in their local environments, so schools like the University of Cincinnati, for example, be impacted, or maybe see increase in international students wanting to come to Cincinnati to study because of the Bengals, right? Or thinking about a school like let's pick another random school, if you will. George Mason, right, with the Commanders. So for those Commanders fans recognizing George Mason ranks in DC, might there be international students who choose George Mason as an institution, or American University, or GW as an institution to study in order to watch the Commanders play, eight home games a year over there times four, or however long they're in the United States? So I'm excited. I'm very, very excited for what's to come. I think both this conversation was long overdue, as well as my own, reflection and insight in regards to what's coming next. We will continue to have different Tim Talks episodes diving into a topic that either I've seen or have witnessed and or have studied or continue to study. But as always, if there's someone who's, doing work at this intersection or parallel of global sport, international ed, and Black culture, hit me up. Let's get them on the podcast. Let's talk. Because we'll have also some guest episodes beginning to roll in at the turn of the new year. But again, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Walk with TFB. Hope you learned at least one thing you can take and apply and or share with someone within your respective network. But if not, again, just appreciate you showing up for Walk with TFB and myself throughout this journey. And more to come. Exciting things are happening. Exciting things are happening. Again, thank you, Bernabeu, excuse me, for our time together last week or so. But as always, until then, walk in. Peace out.